Do, 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 do. Yeah, come on. Uh-huh. Yes. Actively ignoring. Okay, so I'll finish talking about what is religion, God willing, or the gods willing, or the force, whatever. It's world religions. And then we'll move on to whatchamacallit, very brief introduction to religious studies. Okay, so where did I end this? Religio. Romans speak about religio. Oh, I haven't gotten there yet. Okay. All right. So I finished by talking about different words that are used that seem to be pointing to a unique reality, a special reality, which we can call religion. The Romans called it religion, religio, and everything else that was not religio to them they called superstitio, superstition. But dharma, Tao, the theos, etc., and so forth, and religio. So obviously, these collections of beliefs and activities that we see in humanity are rooted in and influenced by different human cultures in which they've arisen, flourished, changed, etc. That would seem to be obvious. So Indian religion looks like Indian culture in general, Judaism and Christianity look very well. I should say Judaism in particular looks very Middle Eastern, as does Islam. Christianity looks like a combination of the Middle East, and the West. So not all religions are the same. Shouldn't expect them to be necessarily, just as not all games are the same. There are different types of sports, or not all music is the same, not all political systems are the same, and yet we can study sports, you can study musicology, you can study politics, even though they're not all the same and can be very, very different. There seems to be some family resemblance because we're talking about something. These ideas and activities necessarily demonstrate a family resemblance, a network of overlapping similarities. Okay, so remember, I'm responding to those religious studies scholars that would say, well, we really don't know what religion is, or it really was just a word that was placed on certain activities, cultural activities. And so, no, I'd say that, we just like we place, politics on certain things that we see in cultures that seem to deal with political systems or how societies organize themselves and choose leaders and stuff like that. And it's just a word, politics, but there is some reality that we're dealing with here. There's something which, when we see certain traits, we call it religion and not politics, not sports, not music. So, 19th century academics, those living in the 1800s in Western European universities, preferred to call human beings' experiences of a transcendent power or force in the world religion. Okay, fine. They took the Roman word, the Latin word religio. But just because a category was created to identify something does not mean there wasn't something there to identify in the first place. There was a datum. Like the word data means information, things that are given to us. And the singular is datum. Have you noticed on like the news and stuff, they're pronouncing it data now in TV shows? When I was growing up, it was always data. Data, data. Now it's data. No? That's why I have my little friend Coffee. Coffee understands me. Get who gets you, right? eHarmony. Anyways, where am I? Oh, yes. There is a datum that's to be experienced and identified. So the category is not suspect because it arose in a certain culture, European culture in this case, or a certain milieu amongst academics, eggheads who are thinking about these issues, okay? Because sometimes people will just dismiss it in religious studies and say, well, it's just a Western idea by a bunch of scholars and stuff, not by the people on the ground who are living these things. Okay, fine. So the people living these things, the commoners, you might say, I don't mean that in a negative term, but might not have come up, might not have said, If you ask them, well, what is this that you believe? They might have a different word for it or something, but they do have a word for it probably. It might not say religion, but it might just be, oh, this is our way of life. This is what everything that we do is this, And we might look at it more specifically and say, yeah, but it looks like religion too. And you would both be right. So what is, that's interesting. What is religion? Oh! Now, how do you know they're not mail carriers? Right? Mr. Well, I still get to see. I can't call on people because I don't have all the names yet. But I'll figure it out. I'm getting there, slowly but surely. Mr. Irvin. That just means. How do you know that they're not football players?
I think the way they're dressed, they're not really wearing like the usual protective gear. They're wearing shorts.
Do you think they're religious figures?
Possibly.
Possibly. Good answer. Yes. Good answer. Possibly. What makes you possibly think they might be religious and not something else?
Sort of headband / hat looking things on their heads. The robes they're wearing.
Robes.
Very religious in a way.
Interesting. Couldn't they be judges? Maybe in a courtroom? They wear robes? Yes, Miss, don't tell me. Purnell? Yes. Purnell?
I mean, like, yeah, it's good a religion, but like, it can also be like tradition. Like
Tradition?
A ceremony or something.
Okay. Yes, sir, Miss, don't tell me, Mr. I've got it right. Mr. I got it. Holstein.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's just the bright colors that you see that with like people in court.
Yeah, like judges wear robes too.
Yeah, I think it's just the bright colors you would see that in like a formal setting. It's just
Why not?
I guess it's because I was just gonna say because like I guess kind of what you're wearing now is different.
Yeah, with something more dressed up. Well, I would say, yeah, there's a point. It's cultural. So, I mean, in a different culture, maybe like in a courtroom setting, in our courtroom setting, the judge wears a black robe. I don't know why it has to be black. Why couldn't it be these colors? Bright yellow or red. It doesn't have to be. I mean, English courtroom is red. Actually, in the state of Maryland. Anyone from Maryland? Anyone from Maryland? Yes? Your Supreme Court justices, the Supreme Court of Maryland? You ever seen pictures of them? No. They wear red robes and they wear little, what do they call them? The things around the neck, just like I can't remember. I don't remember, but you know what I'm talking about. They're like with almost like little ties, like cravats and things.
Oh, there. Okay.
Yeah, they look like British judges, except they don't wear wigs. I don't know why. Maybe that's because from tradition from way back when Maryland was a British colony or an English colony, like we all were. Okay, I just throw that out there, and I'll throw that question out there a lot, just because I want you to think about that. What exactly? As soon as you see this picture, they're probably not politicians, they're not judges from a courtroom, they're not football players, they're not sports players, but they probably are religious. And why is that coming? I don't know. Oh, I look a little closer there. Actually, I'm kind of surprised. I didn't know there were white supremacists. The OK symbol. Well, they are the original Aryans. I will say that. Now they're probably just saying, okay, hey, how you doing to the person who's taking the picture. But yeah, they're probably Hindu holy men. And Hindus in the Hindu religion, they like to paint their foreheads and parts of their bodies and stuff like that with sacred paste, powder. All right. Anyways, what's religion? Whoops. All right. Religion. Many human cultures seem to recognize a superhuman reality of power and meaning existing above, transcendent, transcendo, remember, transcendent, and yet amongst human beings. Not all human cultures, but many human cultures seem to recognize the existence of something like this. And they witness to this belief that there is a reality filled with beings, places, and things that are not part of the real or the normal or the ordinary world. Religions, are goofy. And a lot of they oftentimes deal with very strange stuff, some of which we'll talk about in class. But this reality sometimes interacts with and interferes with or breaks into the normal world. And this reality has a meaning and a truth to it that the normal, quote-unquote, normal world does not have, at least not fully. This reality is filled with power. There's a sense of power to it, a force to it. It arouses strong feelings in the person, even if you can't verbalize those feelings sometimes. But a lot of times when people, it's an experience. You experience something. And it has a meaningfulness, that are not found usually in the normal world. It explains the world to the person. And for a lot of people, this reality or this superhuman reality alone provides final fulfillment for the human person, for human life. For many people, this superhuman reality is final. It's accepted as maybe the final definition of what reality is. It's definitive and it's ultimate. It's the end of all things, where there is no beyond. Latin word ultimate, as you can see here, ultimate reality. Ultimate comes from the word Latin ulter, ultra, ultrum, the adjective. Uh-oh, I'm losing somebody. Uh-oh. Anyways, which simply means last. And we know this in how we use the word, Ultimate means something that's last or the end. It can also mean that something that's on the other side or beyond, beyond this reality that we're experiencing now. Even if in some religions there might be a reality beyond that ultimate reality that goes on for eternity, forever. Generally, this world, this reality, is not directly visible. You can't see it directly. You can't experience it, though. It's not directly visible or perceivable by normal means. Where religion kind of comes in. A lot of the rituals in religion are to kind of not anticipate. What's the word I'm looking for? Or that's not the right word. Facilitate, that's the word I'm looking for. To facilitate this experience of this invisible world. They become, the word that's kind of used is trans-empirical, across our experience, going beyond our experience. You want to have trans-empirical, I don't say that. It's a trans-empirical reality. It transcends or cuts across the natural world, but also this other invisible realm of existence. This ultimate reality, this reality is generally conceived to be absolute or complete or conclusive in some way, more so than the normal world is, which is constantly changing. And it's considered to be eternal or continuing forever throughout space and time, and incomparable. You can't compare. It's hard to compare it to anything else. You have to kind of experience it. And again, that's kind of what the world religions are designed to do, to facilitate your experience with this trans-empirical realm. So all the things that you're doing, pounding drums, or chanting words, or singing songs, or dancing around in a circle or something to kind of get into an altered state of mind. These are kind of trying to open up your mind or the brain to open up the door to this trans-empirical realm so that you can participate in it and experience it. Taking drugs, stuff like that, is also one way that people do these things in religions. This reality is totalizing in that nothing is in human existence is beyond its influence. So it encompasses the whole total person. And I call this reality, not just me, but the definition I'm giving is of ultimate reality, a power, a force, you can call it an order to the world that is believed to encompass the universe and give it final and lasting meaning. You might object and say, well, Dr. Dunn, isn't that what science does? Doesn't it? Well, no, science doesn't do that. Because science is descriptive. It describes the world as it is. But if you ask a scientist, well, what was before the Big Bang or what's beyond the limits of our universe, they'll humbly tell you, I don't know. We don't know. We don't have the instruments to, people can theorize about it, but we don't currently have the instruments to see that far or to, know what happened 14 billion some years ago. Or I think it's around 13 some billion years ago now. But religion isn't like that. Religion believes that, people who believe in religion believe that this power or force gives lasting and final meaning to everything. They do know. Reality, I said what ultimate means. The word reality comes from the Latin word which simply means a thing, res. Reality is the thing. It's the thing we experience. So res, a thing or an object. Ultimate reality is ultimate because there is nothing beyond it, whether conceived physically, in other words, that it extends on forever. And some religions have a very physicalistic idea of the universe. They're not, Christianity and Judaism are very spiritual, but not all religions are like that. A religion like Jainism is very physicalistic. The world is matter, everything's matter. But it extends forever, for eternity. So there's nothing beyond it. So whether a religion conceives that physically or existentially, for example, like Judaism and Christianity and also Islam, when they talk about God, who is the ultimate reality, God is the source of all existence, the source of all being. So they're looking at it not from a physical perspective, but looking at it from an existential perspective. God is the ground of being, of existing. So it's ultimate. There's nothing beyond it. And it is real. And it alone is real, actually. It alone actually is. It gives purpose, meaning, and reason to and for everything else, from the highest form of being, the gods, to the lowest form, to the atom. Some scholars would call this not ultimate reality, but in religious studies they might talk about the sacred. This is another way of describing ultimate reality, this experience of power and meaning in the universe. You might call it sacred or holiness. It's a realm of existence different from and separate from the normal, ordinary world. You have the sacred and you have the profane. What is the profane? Whatever is not sacred. Very simple, straightforward definition. If it's not sacred, it's profane. Okay? And the word profane comes from two Latin words, profanum, which means before the temple, before, meaning locationally, things that are done outside the temple precincts. Within the temple is a sacred space, When you enter it, you have to do certain rituals and things. You have to do things in the proper way. You have to dress a certain way, speak a certain way, move a certain way. But outside the temple, you don't. Because you're in the profane world. You're outside the temple. You're profanum. You're in profane world. So you can talk and walk and do whatever you want out there. Okay. You find this, like, for example, I remember one time I visited a mosque, and had to take my shoes off. You're not allowed to walk in with your shoes because now you're entering a sacred, holy space. You also you're supposed to wash before you enter the place of prayer, so that you have a place where you can wash. And that's not unusual to religions. If you go to I went to a Jain temple once. Nobody was there. I was just walking around taking pictures and stuff. But they also had a place for people to wash before they entered into the temple. To cleanse yourself, because you're entering, again, a sacred space, a non-normal space. Once you're outside that space, who cares what you do? So sacred, the name for a transcendent, enduring, and powerful order in the universe that is ultimately real and meaningful, from the Latin word sacer, which literally means anything that is dedicated to the service of a god or a spirit. Okay? Once something becomes sacred, when it is kind of given over, it now belongs to the god, and so you can't use it in the same way that you would use it normally in the world. It doesn't belong to you anymore. Sacer is related to the Greek word saos or sos, which I put there in the PowerPoint, which means to be safe, to be alive and well. Trying to think of what the connection might be to sacred, but maybe it has something to being living and being existence. But I'd have to think more about that. Nevertheless, I give it to you. I thought it was an interesting piece of information. I have to think more about that. Does anyone want to read this quote from Peter Metcalf in his article Sacred, which was in the Dictionary of Anthropology? Anybody? Do a solid for Dr. Dunn. Let's see here. Where are we? Read from the PowerPoint. Yes, Ms. Pennick?
Yes.
Go ahead, Ms. Pennick.
Can you hear me good?
I can hear you.
The sacred denotes a set of objects and entities that function defined as different than those of the as an adjective. Did I just say adjective? Adjective. Oh my God. As an adjective, it refers to a quality of difference, of being separate from, and more important to the profane world. In many cases, it implies a link to an unseen or supernatural.
Excellent, thank you. That's Peter Metcalf in his article Sacred in the Dictionary of Anthropology. Okay, so sacred for a lot of anthropologists, this idea of sacred, or I would say ultimate reality, is what kind of defines what religion is, and he kind of denotes what is the function, or what does the sacred mean for a religion. Okay, it defines things as different from ordinary reality. Something's different here, and we have to act differently. It's like, sometimes I go to like a Catholic Mass on Sunday, and you'll see this whole group of people all dressed up in suits and ties. Well, if you've ever gone to a Catholic church, you know Catholics don't dress up for nothing. That's it. I'm just saying, it's like so it's odd. You look at all these people. Oh, ladies are in nice dresses. Well, maybe these days, who knows? But people, ladies are in nice dresses. Men are in suits. What's going on? That's right. They're having a baptism after Mass, because you see a little baby. Oh, okay, yes. Sacred. There's a sacred ceremony that's going to happen. It's important to them. So they do something differently, maybe that they normally wouldn't do. Maybe you might just come to Mass in a t-shirt and togs, but this is, we're going to have a baptism. It's something different. So you dress up for it. Okay, it's sacred, so you're outside of ordinary reality. You don't wear the clothes you would ordinarily wear. Okay? Blah, 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 blah. What was I going to say? Is I going to say anything else? No, I think that's it's self-explanatory. It speaks for itself. Move on for that. I made my point. Peter Connolly, I think this was a textbook I used at one point for way back when, for a class, but this was a good point. In his textbook, Approaches to the Study of Religion, says the only really crucial element for defining a religion is the belief in the sacred. When we have the sacred, then we have religion. When we don't have it, then we don't. Okay? And that's when we had our discussion about the football game that I showed you, and I asked you, how do you know that it's not, I could have asked you other questions. I said, how do you know it's not a religious event? But I could have said, how do you know it's not a political event? For all sakes, now I can't even remember the phrase. Don't get old, people. Anyways, that's what I'm looking for. Don't worry about it. Anyways, but I could have asked that, but I asked about religion. It's not sacred. It's not an ultimate reality. It's a football game that began and ended, and you move on from it. Okay, it doesn't transcend the world. It doesn't define the universe, whereas the sacred does. It gives ultimate meaning to what the purpose of life is and the purpose of the world is. When we have that, we can call it religious. When we don't have it, we call it something else. Right? Could be sports, could be something else. Could be politics. So this is my definition of religion, which is complicated to come up with a definition. You have to think about these things. But for my definition of religion, I would say that religion is the name for the ways that human beings recognize the existence and interact with this ultimate reality. There's the belief that there is this ultimate reality. People want to participate in it, to know about it, and so they create, socially construct and socially create things that allow them to do that. They create tools for interacting with this ultimate reality, and that's what I think we can say is religion and what's going on there. Now, how do we study this? Can it be, now that we've defined that there is something that we can see and interact with and talk about? Oops, I didn't want to do that. There you are. What does it mean to study it? So I'll talk about a very brief introduction to religious studies. It's a picture I got many years ago of this professor on his website, where he was participating. I don't think he's a Hindu, but he's participating in a Hindu ceremony of puja, making an offering to the god Ganesh. If I should tell you the story of the god Ganesh now, I might tell it to you later. But anyways, anyone know who Ganesh is? Ganesh, the Hindu god Ganesh. No, maybe you've seen him before, but anyways. He's, you can't really tell very well good from this picture, but you maybe can see that this god with an elephant head, sometimes spelled with an A at the end. I think the A is silent, so you could say Ganesha, but it's usually Ganesh. Anyways, very popular god in Hinduism, and it's usually represented as a child, as a baby, with an elephant's head. In the Hindu religion, very popular. It's the patron god of education and whatnot. So if you're a student, then sometimes if you're a Hindu student, you might say prayers to Ganesh to help you pass your tests and whatnot and learn the material. Why does he have an elephant's head? Well, his mother was Parvati, who was the wife of the god Shiva. We'll talk more about them later in another class, but anyways. And Parvati made Ganesh out of turmeric paste, turmeric, which is a spice, and she made a paste out of it, and she fashioned a little boy. Why, I don't know. I mean, but anyways, right then and there, you probably know you're in the realm of religion, because this is not a normal thing. Normally, if you're, a wife and a husband, you'd have sexual activity and you produce a child. But no, she goes into the spice rack and she makes a kid, and she produces this kid, and I think she's going to take a bath or something in the house, or she's going to do something in the house, and she doesn't want anyone to come in, so she tells Ganesh, go to the door and guard the door. Don't let anybody in. Being an obedient son, he says, yes, Mom, and he goes and does it. He stations himself at the door. Well, eventually his father, the god Shiva, shows up, wherever he's been, who knows, doing things that gods do, and he wants to come in the house. And Ganesh, being an obedient son, says, no, Dad, you can't come in. And so he restrains his way, or, will not allow his father to come in. Well, that pisses Shiva off. And so Shiva, whose primary symbol, or one of his primary symbols, is the trident, which is a pitchfork with three prongs to it. So it's called a trident, three, okay? And you find this in other religions as well, like the Greek religion, the god Poseidon, the god of the ocean, has a trident as well. So you find some of these symbols occurring throughout religions. I don't know if it was cross-influence or not, but nevertheless. So he has his trident with him, and so he throws his trident at Ganesh and cuts off his head. So Parvati comes out and finds her son dead, lying on the ground with no head, decapitated. Okay, and so that ticks her off. She's angry that he's killed her son, her spice son. And so she, complains to Shiva and says, you got to do something. So Shiva goes and he takes an elephant's head and he sticks it on the lifeless body of Ganesh, and Ganesh comes back to life with an elephant's head. And so you'll see statues, for example, in Hindu temples of sometimes you see statues of Parvati, the mother, with Ganesh on her lap, presenting almost like statues you see in Catholic churches of the Virgin Mary, Jesus, with her little baby boy with the elephant's head. So that's how he gets an elephant's head. His father Shiva cuts his head off and then substitutes the head of an elephant for his formerly head. So they're worshiping him. Religious studies. What is religious studies? Religious studies is the academic field which studies in a descriptive, non-judgmental way the religious beliefs and practices of human beings. This is technically a religious studies course. It's RS 115, okay? It's more theology, but anyways, they go with religious studies, which is, and so here we are. We're studying academically world religions. Okay, I'm not making any judgments on them. I will make some judgments when I talk about how the Catholic Church views other religions. So we do get kind of confessional there. But for the most part, I'm not going to be like, oh, what does the Bible say about this? And then how do we judge Buddhism from the Bible and stuff? And that's not the purpose of religious studies. It's an academic field. It's not theology, which is more of a committed viewpoint. You're not making judgments on the practices of these religions or their beliefs, whether you object to them or not, or agree with them or not. Okay, it's a fair study, I would say. Trying to be fair. The Latin word studies comes from studeo, to be eager about something, diligent, to apply yourself to, or to pursue. So you're pursuing religion, this field of religion, to learn more about it. Religious studies as an academic discipline arose in the 1800s, primarily in Europe and in North America. The person who kind of got the ball rolling, I should say, is this gentleman, Friedrich Max Müller. You can see his dates there, 1823 to 1900. He is considered the father of religious studies. Not that nobody ever talked about religion before this dude, but he did something different with it than people were doing before. No one did to religion what he did in the unique way that he was approaching it, which I'll get to in a second. He was a German scholar, a German who was a scholar, I should say, a German ethnicity, who was a scholar, a linguist, which means he was a scholar of languages, who then emigrated to Britain and taught at Oxford University in Britain. And he was a pioneer in the comparative study of religion, especially through his field, which was linguistic study. He translated and edited a huge multi-volume work called the Sacred Books of the East series, which I have here on PowerPoint, which is still a crucial source for the English language translation of a lot of Eastern religious texts. Since it comes from, you can see when his dates are. He died in 1900, so all of his work is public domain. So it's online, the Internet Sacred Text Archive. There's the website if you ever want to go. He and other people helped him, but translated a lot of works, especially from the Eastern religions, into English, and it's still very useful today. The translation into English is somewhat outdated, so it can be not easy to read sometimes, but you can kind of get the point because it was written in the 1800s. But yeah, I mean, you have translations of works into English that still have not been translated, so that's like still the only resource to find certain works in English, unless you're going to learn the original languages. So it's, even though it's an old work, over 100 years old, it's still a very useful work for religious studies, for finding texts which may not be in English at all. I shouldn't say in English at all, outside of the Sacred Books of the East series. He laid the foundation, and this is his contribution. He laid the foundation for examining religion in a rational and systematic way. If I wanted to delve more deeply into the history of religious studies, I could talk about this historical event called the Enlightenment, which begins in the 1650s in Europe. Whoops. Enlightenment. And Ms. Moses, can you read this? You can? Okay, good. The 1650s, and the Enlightenment goes into, I forget the exact date, but it goes into the 1800s, which was a period of intellectual development in the Western world. Basically, I mean, the long and the short of, that's the phrase I was thinking of before that I couldn't remember. The long and the short of the Enlightenment was the privileging of human reason in the study of anything, okay? Before that, a lot of knowledge was based on tradition, what had been handed on in traditional practices and customary ways of believing and doing things, especially through religion, the Catholic Church in particular. And in the 1650s, scholars and thinkers and intellectuals started saying, no, let's start relying on human experience and human reason to start making decisions about whether something is true or what reality is. And so you start seeing the development of modern science, the modern sciences, and history, and so that's what starts to happen. And this starts affecting all fields of human knowledge. It was also kind of an anti-religious reaction because they wanted to take knowledge out of the hands of the religious elite, the bishops or the priests, and have people decide for themselves and investigate for themselves questions, okay? So the Enlightenment, so it was light. Light had kind of shone through the darkness. You had the Dark Ages where religion was ascendant, but now you have human reason in the ascendancy, and we can know all sorts of things and do all sorts of things now. And the success of the hard sciences, the natural sciences, kind of proved the Enlightenment for a lot of people, because you had all sorts of discoveries being made, and they could see life was being made better by these discoveries by the natural sciences. And ideas were being proposed for all sorts of questions about human existence, the existence of the world, that made better sense than the explanations one might find in the Bible or religious texts. And so this applies to religion as well. Friedrich Max Mueller asks, can we apply human reason to religion and study it just the way we would study anything else, just from a critical, reasonable perspective, not from the perspective of just believing in it? He had his own theories about religion, which I'm not going to get into because his views are largely forgotten. There are no Muellerists around, and we're holding on to Mueller's views of religion. He had his own theories, but really they're kind of discarded. But his contribution was that he laid the foundation for examining religion in a systematic way. His argument for a science of religion, a science for studying religion. In Germany, called it Religionswissenschaft, knowledge or the study of religion. And you can see this in the books that he wrote. For example, his essay, he has an essay in comparative mythology where he compares different mythological stories. But here, Introduction to the Science of Religion. And especially in 1881, the Gifford Lectures, which are given up in Scotland, at a university in Scotland, they're typically given. I think they're still given to this day. I think they're named after someone named Gifford. But, a respected scholar is invited to come and give these lectures, a series of lectures, and then usually the lectures are collected and published in a book later. So his collection of lectures was published in this book called Natural Religion. Okay? So this was influential to people. They read this and said, yes, I agree with this. Religion is not a sacred cow. It shouldn't be off limits to the study of religion through history, through anthropology, through all the science, all the methods that we have. However, as a unique field of study, religious studies is not really a science as commonly understood. I mean, he argued for the science of religion, but he was using the word science in a very generalized way. Okay, the word religious studies is not science, but it is scientific. Okay, the word science simply comes from the Latin word scientia, which means to know something. So scientia, or science, simply means knowledge. So the knowledge of religion is what religious studies is about. So it's not a science like the hard sciences like biology or geology or astronomy, but it is scientific. What makes it different is that its focus of study, its data, is human experience itself, especially humanity's experience of ultimate reality. Let's see if I got that. Whoops. Get that. So religious studies is therefore dealing with subjective data, which could have an extreme variety of interpretations. The hard sciences are more objective, okay? You run an experiment, you get data, okay? And you look at the numbers, or you look at what occurs, and then you run it again and again and again. You keep testing it to see if you come up with the same numbers or the same occurrences, the same happenings. If the same things keep happening, then you get an idea that you know why it's happening. You might have a theory about something, but you want to test it and see if it comes out the way your theory says. If the results contradict your theory, then there's some problem with your theory. If they support your theory, then your theory is probably right. But you have to kind of, you want objective data, objective experience. Religious studies is dealing more with subjective things, for which there could be an extreme variety of interpretations, because you're dealing with human beings who are describing their experiences to you. You're dealing with observation of events and practices, okay, which might not be completely open or not explainable, but interpretable to the person who's observing them and stuff like that. This is not unique to religious studies. You have the same issue with, say, anthropology or psychology, which are also not like the hard sciences in that sense, but are more of an art. They're more artistic. There's a lot of interpretation that has to go into them. So, religious studies has much more in common with science-like fields like anthropology or sociology, psychology, history, archaeology, which are very interpretive, which are more of an art than a science. They're artistic sciences, I might say. You have to have a lot of interpretation. They might use the hard sciences, like psychology is very reliant on the hard sciences. You study the brain and the makeup of the brain and how the brain works and drug interactions and stuff like that. So also, but a lot of it, psychology is also theories about personality and the mind, which is very difficult to pin down, which is why you have so many theories about personality and the mind. And talk therapy, where you talk to people, and you have to do a lot of interpreting about what the person is telling you and what might be the problem from what you can tell from what they're telling you. And what's the resolution? What might be the solution? As one of these artistic sciences, religious studies utilizes a lot of the methodologies and techniques of these other, both the hard sciences as well as the soft sciences. So in religious studies, you might have people who study neuroscience to understand how the brain works and use that knowledge from a hard science, neuroscience, to then make theories about where religion comes from. Like, is the brain wired for religious experiences, like other out-of-body supernatural experiences, or creating hallucinations where people see things or think they experience feelings of oneness with the universe through the administering of the interaction of certain drugs on the brain and stuff like that. So using a hard science to then address religious questions. In religious studies, they might talk about anthropology, studies of different cultures throughout the world to then compare them to other religious beliefs. Or psychology. That's a picture of Sigmund Freud. What role does religion play in psychology? Freud, who was a psychiatrist, he was a medical doctor who was also dealt with diseases of the human mind, wrote extensively about religion. He was fascinated by religion. Didn't like religion, but he wrote a lot about it. Anyways, and applying, knowledge of how the brain works and also psychoses, mental illnesses and how those might tie into religious practices, etc. So the principles of psychology and also archaeology, digging stuff up, like stones. I forget where I got this picture from, but anyways, some stone, and they have text written on it telling you who this person is and what he did and stuff like that. And so, you might have religious figures mentioned, use archaeology, and you might use sociology, the study of how human societies work, and you might use psychology, how the brain works on people, and again, how mental illnesses work, or just neuroscience, as I mentioned already. Religious studies adheres to the scholarly method, which I'm going to describe for you just so you understand where religious studies is coming from. And the scholarly method broadly encompasses certain ideas. There are basically 3 ideas. The first of the ideas is that you cannot appeal to a criterion of analysis that is in principle unavailable to others. So I mentioned before about, like, this is a world religions class, but I spend my time, breaking out the Bible and talking, okay, what does the Bible say about the Buddha's teaching on Atman or something like that? Or what is the Bible's teaching about whether Muhammad is a prophet, is really a prophet? Or what is the Bible? That's breaking this first rule, because I am using a criterion that in principle is not open to the people I'm discussing. A Hindu, a Buddhist, a Muslim does not accept the Bible as a criterion for analysis. It's not part of their belief system. So it's in principle unavailable to them as a form of debate or argumentation or even knowledge about what they believe, because they just don't accept it. They don't believe it. Okay? But reason is, that's why the focus here is on anthropology is, sociology is, because we're not appealing to a certain religious standard or a certain objective standard. We're appealing to really human experience and human reason for studying human life from different perspectives, either society or psychology or culture, or something like that. And that those things people can accept. They can't say, okay, we can talk about the cultural values that might underlie a certain religious belief. Okay, then people can accept that as a standard for argumentation. Where if you start out by saying, well, we're going to judge Christianity by looking at the Rig Veda, which is a Hindu sacred writing, and we're going to see how Christianity stands or falls by the teachings of the Rig Veda in Hinduism. Well, okay, for a Hindu that might work, a person who believes in it already, but for a Christian it wouldn't, or for someone who's not a Christian, like someone who's not a Hindu, who doesn't accept the Rig Veda as a revelation of ultimate reality, that would not be a proper standard of judgment because it's biased. Okay. You want to look to a criterion that people can accept, something that is based on human reason and experience, something we can share. The second point is that one should engage in a thorough investigation of the topic. This might be obvious, but sometimes you never know. It's not just, the scholarly method is not just the mindless writing down of information, like the Pope says, or the Bible says, or the facts say. It's showing that you have really and deeply thought about the subject. Okay, that you've shown that you've tried to, especially if you're an outsider, like if you're someone who is studying the religion of a group that you're not a part of or don't believe in, nevertheless, you want to try to, as much as possible in fairness, enter into that belief system, not because you believe it necessarily, but because you want to show that you want to really and deeply understand it so you can present it fairly in whatever you might write about it or teach about it. Also, you can understand it because you want to understand where maybe these beliefs come from or what function they serve for the people who do believe them. And only to do that, you have to kind of like enter into the person's mind and experience, see what it does for them. Also, this means that you are willing to have your own theories examined and challenged. So you're willing to, a thorough investigation of something means that you're opening yourself up for people to say, I think you're wrong about that. Maybe you haven't thought deeply enough about why this particular religion believes this or does this. So you open up your theories, or you should be you should be willing to allow your theories to be questioned and sifted, not in a negative way, but, kind of people, it's a kind of a compliment. People are thinking deeply about what you thought deeply about. And they're coming back with it and saying, okay, maybe I agree with some of the things you're saying, but maybe you missed this or missed that. Or maybe this doesn't work for what you're saying. You should be open to that. If it's simply, no, this is my view of what they believe, and that has to be the truth, the view. There might be, that's not really the scholarly method. That's more of a prejudice or more of a prejudiced view. You just, not prejudiced in like a racial prejudice view, but that you're not open to further development, further knowledge about what you've thought about or wrote about. Finally, one should be willing to apply to one's own beliefs the same tools and methods of analysis that you would use for investigating the beliefs for another. Okay. So, in other words, this is saying play fair. If you're going to use history and anthropology and psychology, etc., to study a different religion, say you're a Christian who does that, and say you're a Christian whose field is the study of Hinduism. Okay, so you talk about the history of Hinduism, you use anthropological data, you take data from psychology, and you talk about the beliefs of Hinduism and stuff like that, and you're fine with that, but when someone does it with your religious belief, which, as I said, let's say this hypothetical person is a Christian, you object to it, well, that's not the scholarly method. You should be fair. You should allow that if you're going to use certain tools to study other religions or other people's viewpoints, you should be prepared to apply the same methods to your own beliefs or lack of belief. You don't necessarily have to be a believer to deal in religious studies. Okay? That's just playing fair. I mean, that makes sense, I think. When you're arguing, like if you're arguing sports statistics with somebody, then, he batted 250 average, last season. Then that's your basis for argumentation. You should, if you're arguing it with someone, that's your basis for argumentation, and you both should accept that. If someone comes back at you and says, well, I won't accept that being, or say if you, well, that's a bad example. I should have thought that example through. Let me think for a second. Forget about that baseball example. That's a bad one. I should have thought that one through. Anyways, but I think you get the point of what I'm saying, is that, you should be able to accept that if you're going to use certain tools to study another person's ideas, that they should use the same to study yours. It's just basically fair play. Okay. Religious studies, then, is a consciously neutral, non-committed form of study. Now, some people might challenge that and say, can anyone really be neutral, okay, and objective? Well, probably not. So you always have to kind of uncover your own biases, things you might be uncomfortable about or things you might think about the world, and just be aware of them, and you might have to disclose them in your research. Say, this is where I'm coming from, maybe, this is why I'm not fully understanding this religious practice, or why maybe I don't like it or do like it or whatever, but this is where I'm coming from. But there should be an attempt at objectivity, that you're not judging the practices or the beliefs that you are studying. But then that can be difficult, because if someone is coming from a background, say someone has a homosexual orientation, and that's what they're interested in, that's who they are, that might be what they're only interested in when they're studying about religions. How does this religion, how does Jainism, how does Hinduism, how does Buddhism deal with LGBTQ issues, stuff like that. So could you say that's not neutral? Well, maybe in a way it's not being totally neutral, but it's your interest. Okay, when I say not neutral, I mean that you're coming in already with judgments like, well, we already know that all people are saved by Jesus. So that's therefore my point of view that I'm going to impose on this religion. So obviously this religion is false because they don't accept Jesus. That's what I mean by not being neutral, or trying to be consciously neutral or non-committed. Now, you might be a Christian believer who believes that. I believe salvation is through Jesus, but if I'm studying another person's faith system, it's not a question. It's not a question of truth or falsity. I'm not there to make a judgment on them because of their views of Jesus. That's not even a question, because that's not a question for that particular religion, perhaps. So you're not concerned with making positive or negative, true or false judgments on a religion per se. Nor is religious studies concerned with questions of facticity or truth, whether the stories actually happen, the stories that religions tell. If they're because a lot of them are myths, Some of them might be true, if it can be established through historical facts or archaeology or something like that. But, you're not there to say, do these things really exist, or did these things really happen, or is this thing really true? Those are not really relevant questions for religious studies. Those are questions more for, say, theology, a more committed form of study. So if, a religious studies scholar is studying the religions of India and decides that, well, I don't really think like Krishna ever existed, though a lot of Hindus might say he did, or Jesus existed or something like that. That's the determination the person makes. That's their considered opinion as a religious studies scholar. They can't say, well, Jesus had to have existed because Christians believe he existed. That's not the question that's going on for the religious studies scholar. You're dealing with the data that you're given. Christians believe in this person, say Jesus, or Hindus believe in this person, say Krishna. This is what they believe about them. Maybe they existed, maybe they didn't. That's another academic question we can debate about. But again, it's another question. Religious studies is only emphasizing the visible descriptive aspects of religion. So even the question of whether the gods exist that people are talking about, or God, is a datum. It's a fact of the religion, or maybe not a fact of the religion if the religion doesn't have a big belief in a god system. But it's something as a matter of study. And what do they believe about God? The religious studies scholar isn't there to defend, for example, that, oh yes, of course these gods must exist. On the other hand, he or she's not there to say, no, of course there is no God. So obviously these gods and goddesses can't exist. And that's not the question. The question is, what do these people believe about this idea, say, for example, of God or gods and goddesses? So this awareness of, say, God or the divine, or supernature, the supernatural, or the sacred, etc., that people claim to have or experience in a religion doesn't really matter for the religious studies scholar. The religious studies scholar is looking for motivations, origins, functions, effects, what the religions are doing for people. Religious studies, although it is not a natural science or one of the hard sciences, it does have assumptions of the natural sciences. And so in this case, you could say that it's not completely neutral. It shares some of the assumptions of the Enlightenment period and of the hard sciences in particular, like biology or geology. Some of these are materialism, naturalism, empiricism, agnosticism, and evolutionism. And we'll take these in turn. And you'll see these, I think, maybe not all of these, but I think you'll see some of these ideas in evidence in the textbook when they ask questions like, what does a religion do for people? They'll describe what people believe about the supernatural, but they won't really, kind of give you their sense of whether it's true or not. Okay? It's kind of agnosticism. They'll talk about how religions develop, evolutionism, development of religions from earlier forms to later forms. So some of these ideas will be in evidence in the textbook. But it won't be pushing any particular religious point of view, trying to say any religion is true or false. That's not the purpose of religious studies. Oops. First, materialism, which comes from the word materia, which in Latin, which simply means stuff. basics, the basically, or should I say basically, that's what I'm looking for. Stuff in the most basic sense of food stuff. And a lot of the words that we use that we, they sound so fancy, but really they go back to very basic needs of human people. Okay. And here we have the word matter, but really in its most basic understanding, it's the matter that you eat, the stuff that you eat, food. So these, basic needs of the human person are often kind of in the words that we use. Food, sex, community, stuff like that. That's all it means. But in a general sense, it can mean a cause or a source, maybe a more philosophical sense. And it seems to be related to the Latin word for mother, mater. So the mater, the mother is the source of the child. So, she produces matter out of her womb. So again, you see this kind of basic understanding of just how nature is and the physical matter, or kind of a physicalistic understanding of a lot of these words that we use that then kind of get broader understandings and are used in philosophy in fancy ways. But really they have very simple bases, very simple underpinnings to them. So materialism views the world as composed of physical matter, and that's it. So for a religious studies scholar, they're not really looking for an invisible world. In fact, the assumption is that there is no invisible or non-material being like a god or a realm of existence. That's one of the assumptions of religious studies. So a materialistic view of the religion. Some people wonder, well, doesn't this distort religion then? If religion is talking about a supernatural world, God or angels or spirits and stuff like that, and people really believe in these things, are you kind of misunderstanding the religion if you're coming at it with this assumption that, well, there's just a material world and nothing else. So obviously, these things aren't there. But people are talking about them, so we describe how people talk about them. Didn't you say they shouldn't judge? Isn't this a judgment about it? Yeah, it kind of is, and that's why I said that, it's supposed to be a consciously neutral, non-committed form of study, but they do have assumptions, which some people might argue are prejudicial against maybe a correct understanding of religion. So you have to be aware of these assumptions, but they are kind of there. So the world is made of physical matter. There's really no supernatural. And there's naturalism, that the natural material world is the only adequate source for explaining all phenomena. So, a religious studies scholar is not going to take a claim of a miracle, like the suspension of the natural laws of the universe. He or she's not going to take it at face value. They're going to look for a natural explanation. Why? Because the natural material world is the only adequate source for explaining all phenomena. It couldn't have been a god intervening in the world. It must have been something natural that happened that then people interpreted supernaturally. The word nature comes from the Latin word nascere, which means to be born, to arise, to take beginning, to grow. And you look out at nature, and that's what it does. Nature grows. Trees grow, plants grow. You see this, So there is no supernatural, non-physical realm of existence. So non-normal experiences, like out-of-body experiences, miracles, can be explained by natural causes. If a person has an out-of-body experience, or let's say something like a near-death experience, where they commonly, according to people's reports, they see, a tunnel of white light. They meet relatives who are long dead, etc., and so forth. Okay, we can't explain, for religious studies scholars, you can't explain this by this actually having happened. What it must be is we want to look at the brain. We want to take images of the brain and see what was the brain doing at this point of death. What was the brain causing this person to possibly see? Could it have been dopamine, a release of dopamine into the brain that gave this person an out-of-body experience or a near-death, was part of the near-death experience? So it's a naturalistic explanation because the assumption is that there is no really supernatural explanation. Empiricism, human experience. Empiria in Greek means experience, so you rely on personal observation and experiment for all human knowledge. So there's not a place really for tradition or custom. You need to test these things to see if they're true or if they really work. Religious beliefs and practices must be tested. God bless you. If it can't be observed, then it can't be real or true. Personal beliefs have to be questioned and interrogated. You just can't take the religious story on its own word. You have to investigate it and ask questions of it, you know. Christians say that Jesus existed. Well, a religious studies scholar might say, well, okay, let's go back to the Christian text. Let's see what they say about maybe when Jesus was born or when he lived. Can we establish that historically? So we look at historical records. Do we have archaeological evidence of the existence of this man Jesus? Is he mentioned on, I don't know, can we find his tomb where he was supposedly buried, you know? Can we, blah, 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 blah. If we can't find any of these things, well, maybe he didn't. Maybe he didn't. It doesn't mean he didn't. But that's how it works. You can't just take the word of the religion about it. Empiricism. You yourself have to test this religious belief and practice. So here we kind of see an overlap with the empirical sciences, the hard sciences, okay, of testing. This is what you would call it. This emphasis on you yourself observing the results of the experiment. I mean, you can't really conduct experiments in the case of religious studies, but you can, you know, as I said, you can do historical research, archaeological research, all sorts of things. But the point is that you're gathering this data from your own experience and not just taking the word of, say, whatever religion you might be studying. Religions deal with gods and goddesses all over the place, but from a religious studies perspective, you come with a sense of agnosticism, which is the belief that the existence or nature of any ultimate being or reality is unknown or unknowable. Gnosticism comes from the Greek words a or on, which means not, and gnosis, which means knowledge. Gnosis means knowledge. Have you ever wondered why the K is silent in English? It used to not be in the Middle Ages, and what you would pronounce it kno, not no. So notice the connection. Greek and English are related languages, and they mean the same thing. To know something, and gnosis, knowledge. Okay, so to be without knowledge of something, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I mean, it's not that the religious studies scholar is saying, oh, there couldn't possibly a god or gods. But that's the assumption when you're going into it with studying the religion, is that the supernatural realm may or may not exist, but its existence is ultimately unprovable. And this process of studying is called methodological agnosticism. The method you use in religious studies doesn't, you avoid the question of whether it's true or false. That's not the point of your study. You accept, in a sense, you accept the word of the religion. If it says there's a God, then that's part of the data, or that's part of the information of that religion. You take it for what it's worth. You don't say, oh, of course there could be no God. So that's not the point. You take the religion at its word, but you withhold or you suspend your belief in a God or an ultimate reality while you're studying. You're describing, you're not trying to prove it. You're not out there to, okay, this religion says they're a God, say a Judaism or something, so I'm going to prove that Judaism's true and there is a God. Then you're doing something different than religious studies. Religious studies scholar would accept that, okay, in Judaism, they believe that there's one God. This is what, and you describe, this is what they believe. This is what function it performs in their belief system. This is how it defines them as Jews. This is how the idea may be developed in their thinking. Okay? It's a method. It's a methodos, which is a pursuit or an investigation. doesn't necessarily mean you don't believe in a God. You could believe, like I can do religious studies. I believe in God, but if I'm studying another religion, I suspend my own personal beliefs. Like I believe God is a Trinity. He's one God in three persons. But if I study Judaism or Islam, I recognize that they believe that there's one God only, single, unitary, right? So I have to respect that in my study of that religion. In a sense, I'm being methodologically agnostic. Or at least I'm playing fair. Okay. All right, my little buzzer, my friend is going off, so I guess I'll stop here. All right, I'll stop here and finish on Thursday. I'll see you then. God bless you all. Mm. Yes, I know. Have a good day. Thank you. You're welcome. Mm.
I learned so much.
Thank you. You're welcome. Everything okay?
Have a good day.
You too. Thank you.
Don't worry.
Have a good day, miss.
Don't worry. I just
Have a good day.
You too, sir. Thank you.
Hey, Chris, I just want to let you know, next week I won't be here. I'll be in Florida.
Okay, next week.
I know that you have a quiz next Friday, but I know it's like a week more. At least it was in the syllabus. So.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I remember. Okay, good. So there's a quiz coming up. So I will have a video of these lectures. I'll put them up on YouTube so you can watch them there, and also try if you can get notes from somebody who you notice pays attention and takes them. And the quiz will be on Friday, but you have a week to take it, so you have some time to watch the videos and at least get the information.
I just want to let you know. I didn't want to wait till Thursday to let you know.
Great. Okay, so that will be 2 times you're going to be absent?
Yeah, next Tuesday and Thursday.
Okay, so you know about in the syllabus about how many absences I don't,
Is
right?
it 2?
It's 3.
It's 3.
So just be aware of that.
All right.
Because you never know, you might get sick. I try to take that into account, but I just want you to know. So
Yeah,
there aren't any
some
absences.
teachers have it different. It's only 2, so I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I give 3. And after that, there might be penalties, but hopefully not. I try to be generous about it. I understand things happen even beyond those 3. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I'll go.
You too. Nope. Gotta turn off my thing here. Hello, people in TV land. God bless you.